At 23, I suddenly became my little brother's guardian. I thought I'd ruin him, but our journey changed us both in ways I never expected. About 14 weeks ago, both my parents died unexpectedly. I wasn't close to them, but it still really hurt. My little brother Henry is 11, and there was no one else who could care for him. I obviously didn't want him going into the foster system, so I took him in. I'm 23, I just graduated university and had my first proper job lined up, which I had to quit before I even started because I couldn't care for him, grieve, and work. I know that sounds stupid, and looking back, I think I was stupid, but I wasn't doing it out of laziness. I just couldn't cope. I wasn't super close with my parents. They were hardcore Christians, very traditional, and we just never really got on that well. They thought I was lazy and a huge disappointment because I failed uni twice, because I never went to church, because they found weed in my bedroom when I was 16. They had no issue with letting me know that I was their biggest disappointment, so I avoided seeing them as much as possible. I feel guilty for that now because they're gone. And by proxy, I wasn't that close with Henry either. Henry has been homeschooled his entire life. He doesn't have any friends who weren't part of my parents' church group. This post isn't me saying Henry is a bad kid, he isn't. Henry is polite, nice, enjoyable to be with, and helps out around the house however he can. So I don't know why I am struggling so much with him living with me. In some ways, my parents really babied him, and in others, they expected too much. For example, he still co-slept with them and had a 6 p.m. bedtime. They would only let him watch TV shows and movies made for babies and really young children. He wasn't even allowed the real Lego blocks and had to have those big ones you give to toddlers. Yet he was expected to do almost all chores around the house. He didn't even know that this stuff was abnormal, but I suppose you wouldn't. A lot of this I didn't even know about. They did some of it with me as I was growing up, but from what he says, it sounds like they got a lot worse in recent years. I lived in a completely different part of the country than my parents. When it happened, at first, I moved back into their house, and I spoke with Henry about if he wanted to move back to where I was living or if he wanted to stay. He wanted us to move back to where I was living, so after we had sorted my parents' house, we did. I think he saw it as a fresh start. The first few days after moving back to my place were a whirlwind. I had to explain to my now former employer why I couldn't take the job, cancel my plans with friends, and try to figure out how to turn my small apartment into a suitable living space for an 11-year-old boy. Henry was quiet during this time, mostly just watching me with wide eyes as I frantically made phone calls and rearranged furniture. On our third night in the apartment, I ordered pizza for dinner. It was a simple thing, but Henry's face lit up like it was Christmas morning. "I've never had pizza delivered before," he said, his voice full of wonder. It hit me then just how sheltered his life had been. That night, as we sat on the couch eating our pizza and watching a movie, one that wasn't made for toddlers, much to Henry's delight, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe we could make this work after all. But reality came crashing back the next morning when I realized I had no idea how to enroll Henry in school. I spent hours on the phone with the local education authority, trying to navigate the system. It was during one of these calls that I learned about the waiting list for English-speaking schools in the area. "I'm sorry, sir," the woman on the phone said, her voice tinged with sympathy. "But all the schools in your area are at capacity. We can put Henry on the waiting list, but it might be after the Christmas holiday before a place opens up." I felt my stomach drop. But what am I supposed to do until then? I can't homeschool him. I don't know how. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Well, we do offer tutoring services for children in unique situations like this. It's only for a couple of hours a day, but it's something." I agreed immediately, grateful for any help I could get. When I hung up the phone, I found Henry standing in the doorway, looking worried. "Am I not going to school?" he asked, his voice small. I tried to smile reassuringly. "Not right away, buddy. But we're going to get you a tutor, and you'll be in school before you know it." He nodded, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. I felt like I was failing him already. The next few weeks were a blur of adjustments and learning curves. I had to figure out how to grocery shop for 2 people, how to cook meals that weren't just ramen noodles, and how to create some semblance of a routine for Henry. One morning, about a month after Henry had moved in, I woke up to find the apartment spotless. The dishes were done, the floors were vacuumed, and there was even a load of laundry running. I found Henry in the kitchen, standing on a chair to reach the stove, where he was attempting to make pancakes. "Henry," I said, my voice a mix of surprise and concern. "What are you doing?" He turned to me, a smear of flour on his cheek. "I'm making breakfast," he said, as if it was the most normal thing in the world for an 11-year-old to be doing at 7 a.m. "You don't have to do all this," I said, gesturing to the clean apartment. "I told you, you don't need to do chores right now." Henry's face fell. "Did I do it wrong?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. No, I rushed to reassure him. "You did a great job. It's just, you don't have to do all this work. You're a kid. You should be playing, or reading, or, I don't know, doing whatever kids do." He looked at me, confusion clear in his eyes. "But Mom and Dad always said that idle hands are the devil's playground. They said I had to earn my keep." I felt a surge of anger towards my parents. What kind of burden had they placed on this kid? "Henry," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "you don't have to earn your keep here. You're my brother. I want to take care of you." He nodded, but I could tell he didn't really understand. I sighed and grabbed an apron. "How about we make these pancakes together?" That became our Sunday morning ritual. We'd make pancakes together, and I'd try to teach Henry that it was okay to just be a kid. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes, I'd catch him cleaning when he thought I wasn't looking, or I'd find him awake at 5 a.m., trying to start his day with chores. The tutoring session started, and it quickly became apparent just how far behind Henry was academically. The tutor, a kind woman named Ms. Thompson, was patient but concerned. "He's a bright boy," she told me after their third session. "But he's severely lacking in basic knowledge. His reading skills are particularly worrying." I nodded, feeling that familiar sense of inadequacy creeping in. "What can I do to help?" Ms. Thompson smiled. "Read with him. Every day. And talk to him about what you're reading. Encourage him to ask questions. The more exposure he gets to language and ideas, the better." So we started reading together every night before bed. At first, it was simple books, ones that Henry could mostly manage on his own. But as the weeks went by, we gradually moved on to more complex stories. I found myself enjoying these sessions as much as Henry did. It was a chance for us to bond, to talk about things beyond the day-to-day logistics of our new life together. One night, about 2 months after Henry had come to live with me, we were reading Bridge to Terabithia. Henry was curled up next to me on the couch, his brow furrowed in concentration as he sounded out a particularly difficult word. "Imag. Imag in Italian," he finally managed, looking up at me for confirmation. "That's right," I said, smiling. "Good job, buddy." He beamed at the praise, then his face grew serious. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said, marking our place in the book. "Do you think Mom and Dad would be mad at me for reading this book? They always said fantasy stories were dangerous." I felt that familiar mix of anger and sadness that often came up when Henry talked about our parents. "No, Henry. I don't think they'd be mad. And even if they would be, it doesn't matter. There's nothing wrong with using your imagination. In fact, it's a really important part of growing up." He nodded slowly, considering this. "I like using my imagination," he said quietly. "Is that bad?" "Not at all," I assured him. "It's a wonderful thing." We sat in silence for a moment, then Henry spoke again. "I miss them sometimes. Is that okay? Even though they weren't always nice?" I pulled him closer, feeling a lump form in my throat. "Of course it's okay. They were your parents. It's normal to miss them, even if things weren't perfect." He nodded against my shoulder, and I felt his body relax. We didn't read any more that night. Instead, we just sat there, finding comfort in each other's presence. As the weeks turned into months, we slowly started to find our rhythm. Henry's reading improved, and he started to show an interest in subjects beyond what our parents had allowed. He developed a particular fascination with space and astronomy, spending hours poring over books about the solar system and distant galaxies. One night, I found him sitting by the window, staring up at the sky. "What are you looking at?" I asked, joining him. "The stars," he said, his voice filled with awe. "Did you know that some of the stars we see might not even exist anymore? The light takes so long to reach us that the star could have died millions of years ago." I smiled, both proud of his newfound knowledge and sad that he was only now getting to explore these ideas. "That's pretty cool," I said. "Maybe we could go to a planetarium sometime. Would you like that?" His eyes lit up. "Really? We can do that?" "Of course," I said. "We can do lots of things." It wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. There were still nights when I'd wake up to the sound of Henry crying in his room. The first few times it happened, I'd frozen, unsure of what to do. But as time went on, I found myself becoming more comfortable with comforting him. One particularly bad night, about 3 months after he'd come to live with me, I heard him calling out in his sleep. I rushed to his room to find him thrashing in his bed, caught in the grip of a nightmare. "Henry," I said softly, gently shaking his shoulder. "Henry, wake up. It's just a dream." His eyes flew open, wild with fear. For a moment, he didn't seem to recognize me. Then, with a choked sob, he threw his arms around me. They were gone, he cried into my shoulder. I couldn't find them anywhere. I held him close, rubbing his back in what I hoped was a soothing manner. "I know, buddy. I know it hurts. But I'm here. You're not alone." He clung to me for a long time, his sobs gradually subsiding into quiet sniffles. When he finally pulled away, his face was red and puffy. Can I sleep in your room tonight?" he asked hesitantly. I hesitated for a moment. I knew that our parents' habit of co-sleeping with him wasn't healthy, and I'd been trying to encourage independence. But looking at his tear-stained face, I couldn't bring myself to say no. "Just for tonight," I said, and his relief was palpable. As we settled into my bed, Henry curled up close to me. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" I asked. "For being here. For taking care of me. I know it's hard sometimes." I felt a lump form in my throat. "You don't have to thank me for that, Henry. You're my brother. I'll always be here for you." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I love you." It was the first time he'd said those words to me, and I felt something shift inside me. "I love you too, buddy," I replied, surprised by how much I meant it. The next day, I called Ms. Thompson and asked if she could recommend a child psychologist. I knew we both needed help processing our grief and adjusting to our new life, and I was finally ready to admit that I couldn't do it all on my own. As the months went by, things slowly got easier. Henry started seeing Dr. Larson, a child psychologist who specialized in grief counseling. I saw my own therapist, trying to work through my complicated feelings about our parents and my new role as Henry's guardian. Henry's academic skills improved dramatically. By the time a spot finally opened up at a local school, just after the Christmas holiday, Ms. Thompson declared that he was ready to join his peers in the classroom. The night before his first day of school, I found Henry sitting on his bed, staring at his new backpack with a mix of excitement and fear. "You okay, buddy?" I asked, sitting down next to him. He nodded slowly. "I'm scared," he admitted. "What if the other kids don't like me? What if I'm too different?" I put my arm around his shoulders. "You know what? You probably are different. But that's not a bad thing. You've been through a lot, and you've learned so much. Those experiences make you who you are." He looked up at me, his eyes wide. "Really?" "Really," I assured him. "And you know what else? The other kids might be different too. Everyone has their own story. The important thing is to be kind and be yourself." He nodded, seeming to take strength from my words. Will you walk me to school tomorrow?" "Of course," I said. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The next morning, as we walked to school hand in hand, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride in how far Henry had come, fear for the challenges he still faced, and a deep, unexpected love for this kid who had become such an important part of my life. As we reached the school gates, Henry stopped and looked up at me. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady despite the nervousness I could see in his eyes. I knelt down to his level. "You've got this, buddy. And remember, I'll be right here to pick you up when school's over." He nodded, then surprised me by throwing his arms around me in a quick hug. "Thank you," he whispered, then turned and walked into the school, his head held high. As I watched him go, I felt a surge of emotion. I thought about how far we'd both come in the past few months. How we'd gone from practically strangers to a real family. How I'd gone from feeling completely overwhelmed to, well, still overwhelmed sometimes, but also more capable than I'd ever thought possible. I wasn't perfect. I still made mistakes, still had moments of doubt and fear. But as I watched Henry disappear into the school building, I realized something important. I wasn't ruining him. I was doing my best to give him the childhood he deserved, to help him grow into the person he was meant to be. And maybe, just maybe, in the process of taking care of Henry, I was becoming the person I was meant to be too. As I turned to walk home, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We had a long road ahead of us, Henry and I. There would be challenges and setbacks, moments of joy and moments of sorrow. But we would face them together. And somehow, I knew we were going to be okay. The months that followed Henry's first day of school were a whirlwind of activity and adjustment. Every day brought new challenges, but also new joys. Watching Henry navigate the world of school, make friends, and discover new interests was like seeing the world through fresh eyes. There were difficult moments, of course. The first time Henry came home upset because someone had made fun of him for not knowing about a popular TV show, I felt helpless. But we talked it through, and I reminded him that everyone has different experiences and knowledge. The next day, he went back to school with his head held high, ready to learn about this show and share some of his own interests with his classmates. As Henry grew more confident at school, I found myself facing new challenges at home. Balancing work, I had finally found a job that allowed me to be home when Henry needed me. Content from the previous artifact remains the same. Continuing from as Henry grew more confident at school, I found myself facing new challenges at home. Balancing work, I had finally found a job that allowed me to be home when Henry needed me. Household responsibilities, and Henry's needs was a constant juggling act. There were days when I felt overwhelmed, questioning whether I was really cut out for this. But then there were moments that made it all worthwhile. Like the day Henry came home from school, bursting with excitement because he'd been chosen to participate in the science fair. We spent weeks working on his project together, learning about solar energy and building a small solar-powered car. The night before the fair, as we put the finishing touches on his display board, Henry looked up at me with a grin. "You know," he said, "I think Mom and Dad would be proud of us." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Yeah," I managed to say. "I think they would be." As the one-year anniversary of our parents' death approached, I noticed Henry becoming quieter, more withdrawn. I knew he was struggling with his emotions, just as I was. The night before the anniversary, I found him sitting on the floor of his room, looking through an old photo album. I sat down next to him, putting an arm around his shoulders. "It's okay to miss them," I said softly. He nodded, leaning into me. "I do miss them," he admitted. "But I'm also happy here, with you. Is that wrong?" "No, buddy," I assured him. "It's not wrong at all. We can miss them and still be happy with our life now. I think that's what they would want for us." We spent the next day quietly, sharing memories of our parents and supporting each other through the waves of grief that came and went. As we sat on the couch that evening, watching a documentary about space, Henry's latest obsession, I realized something important. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were living, growing, building a life together. It wasn't always easy, and I knew there would be more challenges ahead. But looking at Henry, seeing the curious, kind, resilient boy he was becoming, I felt a deep sense of pride and love. I wasn't the perfect guardian. I made mistakes, I had moments of doubt. But I was trying my best, and that seemed to be enough. Henry was thriving, and in my own way, so was I. As the credits rolled on the documentary, Henry turned to me with a serious expression. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" I asked. He shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "For everything. For being my brother. For taking care of me. For letting me be me." I pulled him into a hug, feeling a swell of emotion. "Always," I promised. "We're in this together, kid." And as we sat there, the soft glow of the TV illuminating our living room, I knew that whatever challenges the future held, we would face them as a family. We had come so far from those first uncertain days, and while our journey was far from over, I was no longer afraid. We had each other, and somehow, that was enough.